Thank you all for coming this afternoon for the Affordable Housing Panel. And this is being broadcast, or will be broadcast, on our local station, the VCAT. So it is being recorded, just to let you know. And so how we're going to, this is also a both via Zoom and in live. So I'm really happy to get some people that actually came live and aren't just doing Zoom, but it's also nice. It's a good, we're going to test this out. And as we get better at it, maybe we will become very proficient in how to do this. So here's our, we're kind of the test case here. So thank you for coming to this panel. And just by introduction, my name is Martha Burke. I'm with the League of Women Voters, and our panelists, I'll give them a more lengthy introduction in a second here. But we have Brian Cavanaugh and Sonja and our mayor from Bremerton, Mayor Greg Wheeler. So, so let me just start by saying, okay, housing affordability. It's a big problem here in the Northwest, and it's a problem really in the nation, I think. But in here in Kitsap, the sale prices have actually gone down a little bit. So they are, but they're still about almost 500,000 for an average house, whereas the average income of a family in Kitsap is at a level that can afford about half that. So we really have a gap. We have a gap that's not just now, but it's been building. So that they're saying that we should be building over about 3,600 new houses a year just to start to keep up. Well, we're all in the midst of doing our comprehensive plan, the cities and the county, and they are required to address this issue, both through the Growth Management Act, and also there is a plethora of new legislation that's working its way through this legislature to also address this issue, to make it easier, to streamline the permitting process, and to speed it up and make it easier for more houses to be built. So today we have a panel of people excuse me, that are directly involved in addressing this problem. The first speaker that we will have is Brian Cavanaugh. Brian is a major architect from the Portland area who earned his degree from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. In 2009, he founded the architectural firm Architectural Building Culture, or ABC. And over the past 14 years, his firm has established itself as one of the leading design firms in the Pacific Northwest. And ABC has received over 26 design awards in the local, state, regional, and national levels. In fact, that's where I first heard her. Sonja will be the next speaker. She is the program manager for Built Green. Built Green is a membership network of companies and individuals involved in the green building industry, focused on both the human and environmental benefits of ecological building. So they manage the Green Home Certification Program for the Master Builders Association of King and Snohomish Counties. Sonja earned her Master's of Business Administration in Sustainable Solutions from the Presidio Graduate School, and she brings over a decade of experience in her work. And finally, Mayor Greg Wheeler. So he began serving his first term as mayor in 2018, and then started his second term in January of 2022. He's a lifelong resident of Bremerton. He's a Navy veteran and a retiree of Puget Sound Naval Shipyard Engineering Department. So he's really a local guy. Previously, he served on the City Council in District 4 from 2010 to 2017. 3 of them as council president prior to becoming mayor. He's a member of a number of service clubs, including the League of Women Voters, and many government and nonprofit boards in the community and the region. So these folks are going to discuss ways to address the challenges of building affordable housing through changes in design and regulation and in financing. So I just want a little bit about how we'll do this. So we're going to have the speakers. There'll be some time for discussion between them and then also with the audience. So I'd ask you to hold your questions till the end of the presentations. I also want to point out that the panel is sponsored by the League of Women Voters, which is a nonprofit organization that neither supports nor opposes political parties or candidates. The League does take positions on matters of public policy and advocates for those positions after careful study. It was born in the 1920s as an outgrowth of the women's suffrage movement. The League's purpose was and is to this day to educate and inform citizens so they may truly participate in our democracy. This panel has also been supported by the Kitsap Environmental Coalition. The KEC educates and advocates for safe and clean water, air, and soil to support the health of all life and is focused on the Kitsap Peninsula. They see nature as endowed with its own inalienable rights, that humans are stewards and not owners of nature. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to our first speaker, Brian Cavanaugh.
Thanks, Martha, and thanks to the League for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. It's an incredibly important discussion and one that my practice has been involved with through our work for many years. So I'm going to talk about 2 of our projects. They're projects that are in Portland. I should add that half my career was spent practicing in Seattle. I sat on the design review board for Seattle for a couple of years, and I continue to do work throughout the Pacific Northwest. And so it's not just about Portland, but very much about this area. So the 2 projects I want to talk about, one's a small multifamily project, and the other one is a project that is akin to an ADU, but it was a project for a affordable housing developer in Portland called Central City Concern. The first project, the Jarrett Street 12, is a 15-unit for sale affordable housing project. There's a few reasons to talk about this project. One is its use of what was previously a very small single-family lot. It took advantage of a SDC, and I'll talk about this in a second, SDC waiver program that allowed the developer to offer these units at a much reduced price for first-time home buyers that met a certain income level. And then most importantly, it's utilized modular construction, and particularly volumetric modular construction. So next slide. So Jarrett sits on a very tight site, as I said, at the corner of North Jarrett Street and Interstate. Interstate is a very busy north-south thoroughfare, has one of our light rail lines on it. So in some ways, it makes it a very difficult site to build on, but it also makes it a great site for this type of housing. It's very accessible to mass transit. It's very accessible to other amenities. But as I said, the site is only 3,800 square feet. If you think about your average single family lot, they tend to be around 5,000 square feet. And so this project presented some challenges, in terms of how do you stage a project like that for the contractor and not disrupt the surrounding neighborhood. Jarrett's a very, very tight little street. And obviously we can't do anything on Interstate. Interstate has to stay operational. So we quickly went to modular construction. It meant that we could reduce construction time probably by about 40%. It meant that probably 80% of the construction was done in a factory. Next slide. So modular, what it allows us to do is actually build different aspects of the project simultaneously. So while we were working on site, while the project was in permits at the local jurisdiction, we already had our state approval for all the aspects of the project that were going to be built in the factory. And we could start constructing all the modular units in the factory even prior to our permit being issued at the city. And then once we had our permit for site construction through the city of Portland, we could also start site work. So, on this slide, there's work happening simultaneously, which allows us to greatly reduce construction time for development and for multifamily development. One of the biggest things you're really trying to do is minimize risk, but also minimize time. Time is money in terms of, and also in the issue of bringing affordable housing units to kind of online, time is also a problem. Because it just takes, in a conventional construction sense and conventional development and delivery sense, it's just too slow to deliver enough units. Next slide. So you can just see, here's a little diagram about how the building's made up of 15 modular units. And the units, if you think about your actual dwelling units, some dwelling units are completed by putting together 2 mods. Some are, actually in this case, they're all completed by putting together 2 mods. It was kind of unique. We had to force some conditions on the mods that you might not normally do if the site had different constraints to it, but we had to orient the sites and the mods in this north-south because of not only is the site constrained, but it's also constrained by power lines and whatnot. So you can see the crane there that's having to effectively lift these things almost vertically, kind of bring them over, get them over the lines, turn them and bring them down. So we set the 15 mods in 2 days. So that meant we only had to close Jarrett down for 2 days, which was except for maybe one neighbor, everybody was pretty happy about it. And then if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see what it also forced us to do is actually create a very efficient, compact plan. And even within the, it's a small scale multifamily project, but we actually had, 3 different unit types. We had a very small studio unit that was on the ground floor, kind of directly off the entry there. The back units, the southern units, that was a stack of 3 stacks of 1 bedrooms. And then you also had a kind of larger open 1 bedroom. But all these are very modest. The largest unit was, I think, 580 square feet. So they're pretty modest in their size. Next slide. Another key aspect, and this gets to a little bit of I think what we're going to be talking about, is construction costs. So one of the things, we've done a lot of work with this particular developer. This developer is very interested in bringing for-sale affordable units, usually focused on first-time home buyers. And this particular kind of typology of a small infill multifamily housing on what were predominantly single-family lots lends itself to also probably the most affordable construction type. So these are all type 5B, not to be too technical, but it's it's the way you build a house, basically. And so you can see this would be it's very simple construction. And modular construction, especially wood modular construction, you're effectively building what you're ultimately wind up with is something that's just a slightly more robust wood frame structure, because you are building, each of the mods are built the way you build any kind of wood structure. They just have to be structured in a way that they can be transported, but it's just wood frame construction. So it lends itself quite well to this type of project. Next slide. And then what ends up happening is a key thing for us was having a project, even though it's modular construction, doesn't look like modular construction. So the inside, you can't really tell where the mate lines are between mods, but obviously the mate lines, this is one of the walls here. So there's 2 mods coming together right here. And so you just have moments here and here where you have to deal with where you might have incomplete construction when you bring the mods on site. But it was really important to us to have units that felt like any other type of unit that's on the market. And the next slide. So the other aspect to this, and it gets kind of to zoning, and all cities kind of have different versions of this, but this is in Portland, this is in a design overlay zone, which means a normal project might have to go through what's design review, which adds a huge amount of risk to the developer and a lot of time. But the city of Portland also offers objective community design standards, which if you opt into those, then the review, in a sense, the design review gets folded into your normal permit process. And so you're not adding a bunch of time to this. And so I only bring this up because it was essential for us to be able to take advantage of community design standards. And it allowed us to think kind of creatively about how we dealt with the facade. Sometimes with modular construction, a developer is wanting as much of the work done in the factory as possible. We have found that what we don't want any of the cladding done in the factory. We want to be able to have it done on site because it gives us a lot more flexibility in the ultimate aesthetics of the exterior. And we had, just not to get into the weeds, but one of the community design standards was that if you don't have a pitched roof, you have to have a cornice. And we didn't really want to have a cornice on a contemporary building, so we thought, well, we're going to have this cornice up here. We're going to make the cornice part of these sort of striations or this sort of layers to the building, and we just kind of blended into what is otherwise a series of layers. And just a little bit of detail how that came about. But it all speaks to being able to, within constraints, achieve incredibly, I think, innovative and creative solutions that, this is a modest building. It's trying to be very quiet and very infill, but at the same time, it's actually a pretty much beloved project by its tenants. So people that purchased last one and this one, interiors, connection back to the neighborhood. So the next project, so the next project, Laura's Place. Laura's Place is technically it's supportive housing. It is a project that serves a center called Letty Owens Center in Portland, which serves single mothers who have come through issues with addiction. So it's a recovery program. And when they graduate from Letty Owens, then they can go to Laura's Place for usually about 6 months they usually have a small child. And so they can begin to kind of reintegrate themselves into just daily life and all the things that it needs to live day to day. So look, CCC was donated this strange old house so all of this is the existing portion. It used to be a 2-story house. The couple owners ago, it caught on fire. They scraped the second floor, put on this little weird mansard, and turned it into a little tiny fourplex. And when it was a fourplex, it was donated to CCC, and then CCC operated it for a bit. But then they hired us to add as much density as we could to the project. And given this project is in a zone that no longer exists in Portland, but it's this RH zone. RH allowed you to do it measured density by the amount of area the site was. So we had the potential to have 5 units on here. They already had 4. We could at least by right do another unit. And then through density bonuses, which is something we should probably talk about in today, we could squeeze 1 more unit out. So, and in this case, it was an older ordinance in Portland, but doing things like we have solar hot water in this project. We have added green space, which made a lot of sense for this project because there's kids and the expanded play area. We can keep going, sorry. We'll keep going again. So what we were thinking about on this was, and this I think gets to, I think, an important topic of this is how do you utilize sites and get density into, complex sites, maybe sites that maybe you don't think about how you can transform them. We were thinking about if we take these 2 units, how can we actually completely transform the site, transform it for the residents, for the mothers, for the children, make it safer for them, because right now, when it's an existing state, it wasn't really very safe in terms of the entries, providing really no common space for the residents. no spaces to play. And so we thought strategically we'll deal with the yard spaces and make the entrances much safer and go again. So through these kind of strategic interventions, new, more visible entries to the existing units. The two new efficiency units will offer more at-grade entries, solar hot water, and then we turn the old garage into a community space. And the two efficiency units, that whole addition is probably 720 square feet. These are probably 360, 380 each. Go again. And so you can see the result is us expanding that previous front yard into a more usable space. You have at-grade units. The new two efficiency units actually creates a little courtyard space outside of the garage, and then of course the solar hot water. And then through a series of pretty economical ways to achieve green walls, create more landscape, more green space around. Okay, next one. So I get this little plan of these two little units. Yeah, if this type of unit was in a larger affordable housing project, you would think of them as efficiency units. But they have a little kitchenette and a little sleeping living area that you can kind of get a two-top in there, and bike storage, and obviously accessible restrooms. Next one. And so the result, again, we weren't going to do anything to the existing house other than maybe try to have a paint scheme that gets the play off of the new project. And this is very early on, so all that kind of screening around the deck spaces and entries to the existing is now, if you were to go there, it's full of this a flowering vine, and it's very dense. So it's been pretty successful. One more. So yeah, just kind of on through these. Final. There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. And our next speaker will be Sonja Auclair.
Okay, so I am Sonja Auclair. I'm the program manager at Built Green, which is next slide. Which is the next slide. So just to give you a little background about Built Green, we are a program operated by the master builders of King and Snohomish County. However, we certify projects across Washington. So if you have ever seen Built Green here in Kitsap County, we are that Built Green. So we administer that program across the state, but we are operated out of the Bellevue office of King County. So we are a residential green building certification program, which means we only certify projects that are primarily housing. We don't certify schools or anything commercial, just housing. We have certified over 23,000 projects representing over 42,000 homes in Washington state, which also represents over 55% of all green buildings certified in this state. So we are the predominating green building certification in this state, regardless of what project type you're talking about. We certify remodels, so existing housing. We also certify primarily new construction of all different scales, primarily single family, low rise and mid rise multifamily. Anything that you've seen that's like a tall high rise is typically through a different program that has more of a national coverage and deals with those projects specifically. That's also known as LEED, if you're familiar with that. And we are a third party verified system, meaning that an independent third party is the one verifying that the green features and strategies that were, said were done, were actually done on the project. So what that looks like is you have your developer or builder, you have the third party verifier, and then you have us. We develop the standards and the checklist and everything that goes with that. and administer those certificates and reviews, but the third party verifier is the one working with that builder to actually verify all those components were done. Sort of similar to a city inspector, but in a much more detailed way. All of our strategies are voluntary beyond code strategies. So typically, the minimum requirement is that the project has to meet code, right? First and foremost, we're not going to certify anything that doesn't meet state code. But then on top of that, we do have some additional requirements that are, you know, some very basic low-hanging fruit kind of green strategies. And then from there, the builders and the developers can choose which strategies they want to use on that project to reach the ultimate, what we do, scoring mechanism. So we use a point-based system, there are credits involved, and they earn credits as they're doing different strategies. Our sections, it's a holistic program, meaning we look at more than just energy. So if you're familiar with WaterSense or Energy Star, we go beyond what those programs, those are, you know, looking at just water or just energy, we look at everything. So we are scoring a project and the builder's performance in 6 different categories: site and water, energy efficiency, health and indoor air quality, material efficiency, equity and social justice impacts, as well as operation, maintenance, and homeowner education. And then this is a picture of something that you may be familiar with. This is the Grow community in Bainbridge, and that is also a Built Green certified site. That's it. So what does Built Green do other than certify housing? Well, we adjust our standards every time the state code cycle changes. So that's about every 3 years right now with the state building code and the state energy code. So because we are Washington based, our standards are based on Washington code and going above and beyond our local code, which means that we're not based on a national average, we're based on Washington's building standards. And that is typically higher than the national programs because our code is just higher than many other places in this country. So when we talk about Built Green and kind of compare it on a national level, we are actually outperforming many of the larger national programs because our baseline is already set higher than theirs are. So we can all be proud that even if you're buying a co-built home here, it's still potentially 30% better than homes in other states that have those lower code baselines. But we're getting even better with the Built Green certification. So the other things we do is we educate the home building community on the leading best practices to really achieve cost-effective, sustainable, responsible building. We use our certification to add value to builders through finding incentives that gets them to build greener and allows them that flexibility. We also provide that marketing advantage for if your home is certified, there is a market for that. People want efficient, resilient, green homes that are a good investment for their dollar. And so when we're talking about from a consumer standpoint, there's market advantage for you there. And then we do a lot of work with cities and counties to develop valuable incentives for builders and homeowners to take advantage of, you know, to certify and really up, you know, their game in terms of building construction. So how do we build attainable, sustainable communities? We're going to give you a bunch of things today, but this is sort of a very quick overview. First, we have state and county codes, or state and city building codes. Primarily, that's Washington and Seattle. Seattle is old enough that they have their own sort of building code, but everyone else is under the Washington state code. And like I mentioned earlier, our code is a very progressive, energy efficient code. And so that's one way we're getting to that metric of attaining and kind of mitigating impacts of climate change. The second would be zoning and land use planning. Brian sort of touched on this. You know, land is a hot commodity right now, and with the Growth Management Act, it's limited in where we can build in really effective places and where people want to live and make it easy to commute to work or not commute to work. And so we need to be able to build more housing in those areas where the state has really said we need to build here because that makes the most sense. We need to also have rebates and financial incentives that incentivize both builders, the development community, investors, and homeowners to take those changes, whether that's remodeling their own house or whether that's having a builder get, as Brian sort of touched on, a density bonus so that, let's say they get an extra unit on that site, which means that's one more, unit they can sell. Well, in exchange, they're going to certify and build to maybe a higher standard of building using a green building certification like Build Green. So there are, incentives we can structure that are not necessarily giving out money to builders. They're not saying, oh, we're going to reduce permit fees, although there are some cities that take that. There are other trade-offs that we can give to builders that are basically financial incentives, but in a way that it's not just a cash handout. So that's another way we're going to get there. Design and construction strategies. There are just a lot of strategies out there being talked about and researched and experimented with, and also just some basic design principles that help to reduce those costs and to reduce the time, the time and value cost. We need to also support trade career paths because we have a huge shortage in the trades right now because there's been a lot of emphasis, go to college, go to college, go to college. And these trade jobs for decades have been shown to be known about a shortfall coming. Well, that's here. You're in that shortfall. And unless we prioritize people going into these well-paying jobs, labor costs are going to stay high because there is less and less people building homes, working in the trades. So we need to support more people in those career paths and potentially people who have not felt included in those career paths. So marginalized populations who have been sort of excluded or maybe not felt like they belonged in those trades. So, and then lastly, consumer demand. We need to tell builders and cities, this is what we want. We want green housing. How do we get there? How can we work together to get there? And one of the biggest things I hear from builders who are sort of like, well, why should I do this? The biggest thing they tell me is if a consumer asks me to do it, sure, I'll do it. But if they're not going to say, if they don't know what Built Green is, they aren't going to ask me for it, they're not going to demand it, they're not going to feel obligated to do it. So this is why I come to events like this, is to help that consumer demand and that, recognition of what Built Green is so that, a builder can understand. People know about the program and they're going to ask for it. And they're going to ask for them to build something responsible and a little bit better than code. So how do we get there? What are the different ways that we can really build attainable green housing? This is going to be a very broad overview. I'm not going to get into the weeds because there are just too many things to talk about. And I don't have 4 hours to give you a rundown. So we can remodel and reuse. We can have limited footprint. We can use prefabrication techniques like what Ryan was mentioning. We can use design strategies, and we can also use alternative ownership models. So to get into a little more detail about remodel and reuse, the greenest home, as some of you may know, is the one you don't have to build. Remodeling what we have, reusing what has already been built is a really great way to create a green home. There are some new financial incentives out there, which I'll touch on at the end of my time, that can help you get there. And then pairing that with the Built Green certification can give you that peace of mind and market value of my contractor did what I paid them to do, and I have something that I know my building is gonna perform how I wanted it to. So the other thing we can do is actually relocate homes that have been slated for demolition rather than just tearing them down. In the case of this project in San Juan Islands, this entire community was made up of homes that were moved from Seattle and transported by barge and put into this affordable housing community. So there are companies like Nickel Bros in Seattle who routinely list homes for sale that they have pulled off of sites, are sitting in a shipyard, and they barge it and you transport it. It is a great way to keep all of that embodied energy that we put and resources that we put into building those homes. Some of them are historical, so there's lots of great details. You know, to provide a home for another 100 years out of that same structure. We can add a dwelling unit, so similar to what Brian's project did, where they sort of added another unit. We can add a dwelling unit. This is also known as what we call an ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit, or a DADU, which is a detached accessory dwelling unit. And so that's where we can do that. We can remodel, as I mentioned, and adaptive reuse is using commercial spaces and turning them into housing. Limited footprint. We can just build smaller. Smaller houses take less resources. We can fit more of them on a lot, and that will help, you know, spread out that cost over, you know, spread out that land cost over that project to many more units. But it requires the zoning changes that we discussed. Prefabrication can be using technology to really find those efficiency zones, really take chances and without having a risk, because we can do it in a computer. We can use a modeling software to make changes without having to necessarily redraw everything, or in the field find out, oh, this wall doesn't connect. As Brian mentioned, we can use factory production, which can reduce material use and time up to 80%, which time is money, as he said, and that is very much the case. And it also reduces labor costs. These prefabrication modular kind of features take a lot less crew on the ground to put together. So that also helps when you have a labor shortage. These are all different forms of sort of prefabrication. So we have prefabricated framing panels, which are essentially just sort of normal framing panels just built in factory. Structurally insulated panels, insulated concrete forms are basically your whole wall structure prefabricated with insulation and everything, and you kind of put them up, not quite like the Lego blocks, but like pre-made walls. Cross-laminated timber is what this is a picture of. Similar concept, but you're using laminated wood that's laminated in different ways. And then modular and 3D printing is a new one, which I don't know as much about because none of our builders do it, but there's some really cool things if you want to go down a rabbit hole. Alternative ownership is one, the next slide, is one last thing. This is really different pathways we can take to help people become homeowners. So there's co-housing, which is an intentional community of private residents with shared common spaces, and then limited equity cooperatives, community land trusts, and deed restricted homeownerships are all different ways to take one plot of land, and all of these options are sharing them with the community. So they have different equity components in terms of everyone gets a place to live on that piece of land, but they may have limited equity if they go to resell. And typically these involve limiting the people of who gets to live there to a certain income level. So the easiest example of one of these options to think of is like Habitat for Humanity or a community land trust, which is what the San Juan project I showed. So those all deal with basically you own the home, but you may not own the land. And so you still can build equity on that home, but you are limited in terms of you can't go and resell it for $1 million if that's what the market could sell it at, but you do build equity, you own the home itself. But you kind of share some community resources. Next. Lastly, and we'll touch on this a lot more in the conversation, so I'm just gonna really briefly say opportunities to engage. As Martha mentioned, there's comprehensive plans being updated, and you know, that this is the time your voice really says, how are we gonna direct it? Because these comprehensive plans last for 10 years. So where are we gonna take our city for the next 10 years? And lastly, green buildings really don't pick up speed unless we incentivize builders to really do it. So the more green building incentives we can have in a city code with density bonuses, expedited permitting, etc., that's where we're gonna see more builders take that next step. So I encourage you to have those conversations, contact Built Green. I'd love to have those conversations. And lastly, additional resources, which we can throw up at the end. But these are just some of the resources of, there's a policy toolkit by Shift Zero, which talks about, you know, don't recreate the wheel, there's policies out there. Rewiring for America has a calculator that you as a homeowner, if you own a home, can actually find out what money is available for upgrades on efficiency in your home. We have resources as well to help you find copious amounts of information on what you can do in your house. And then the Kitsap Builders Association has contractors to help you, so you can find them in there.
Well, thank you. That really covered quite a gamut. But our final speaker is Mayor Greg Wheeler from Bremerton. So, Mayor Wheeler, go.
All right, so wow, it's a pleasure to be here today. Important topic, and it's one that when I took office in 2018, I made it really a focal point of my campaign, and every effort that I put into it is part of a bigger program we developed in the city. And one of the things we did and we needed to do right away is, first off, make a decision that affordable housing, the challenge of affordable housing is not just for homeowners, it's for renters also. And the second one was to define our housing stock and our housing in the city, and then further define what is affordable housing. And so I'm taking a few notes. This is in a pamphlet that we have on my website, City of Bremerton. And so get us all on the same page as far as our definitions. And then I'll be interested in your feedback and what you've learned as far as what you think, how we should define this. So the first one is deeply affordable. So that's a HUD definition. Deeply affordable housing is 50% of adjusted median income. So in our areas, Bremerton Silverdale, which is how HUD defines our area, it's $102,000. So the deeply affordable would be $51,000 a year median income per household and less. So that is subsidized housing. So workforce housing is from 50 to 80% of your median adjusted median income. So in Bremerton or in our area, I think I'm going to take a look here, about 51 to 80,000. So 82,000. So 51,000, 82,000. And of course, then we have market rate housing, which is 80% and above of the median income. And that's, of course, 82,000 and up. So the city of Bremerton has defined affordable income, the first two categories, which is deeply affordable and workforce housing. So, this is, we're going to get to the slides, and I think when we get into the back and forth, we'll really be able to dive in on this one. So, first slide, please. All right, so this is just a little graphic that we put together, and I felt fit the theme of today as far as the missing middle. So we have the single family homes, where I thought the focus was today, duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, or small apartment buildings. Next slide, please. All right, this is the part of the deeply affordable portion of the affordable housing program in the city of Bremerton. So this is the rental assistance program. When I first took office, we didn't have a rental assistance program that we could use as a model. I developed one with my staff in partnerships with other agencies. So we had it was tough. We didn't have a model, a traditional model. I partnered with Bremerton Housing Authority. They administered the program, agreed to do it. The second year, they were so impressed with the success, and they administered. They deserve a lot of credit. They decided to match us dollar for dollar. So the third year, the state, I don't know if they took notice of our program or not, but the state created legislation that allowed them to rebate sales tax back to jurisdictions that we funneled into this program. So it was a step-by-step process to get that going. And we're still doing it today, and we've increased what we contribute. Home buyer down payment assistance, you can see right there, 775. That's part of home ownership, of course, partnership with community frameworks. Weatherization of minor home repair. This is another program. You're all aware of it. But what I did is I brought it to a city program. I created a city program, and we have more freedom when the cities develop a program like this. This is mainly federally funded for most jurisdictions, but federally funded programs have a lot more restrictions. We can veer off and create a Bremerton specific program, which we did. So 150, this is great. We get the landlord agrees to create, an affordable rental situation for the tenant. You have to income qualify to get this. The weatherization reduces energy costs by up to 30%. It's a healthier, greener environment. So it's a win-win all the way around. And the next one here is the substandard housing displacement program. I'll get a little bit more into that. There's always the concern, and we face this in the city, that when we create opportunities to upzone, and all of a sudden somebody takes that on, you could displace lower income tenants. And so we developed a displacement program. We worked together with the developer, we funded it. And so if we do lose, a lower income tenant loses housing, we help them find suitable and similar housing. Next slide, please. And this one, respite care. I just thought I would put that up there. These are almost shelter beds. This is a partnership with Peninsula Community Health Services, and it's medical respite. So one of our challenges in the city of Bremerton is when folks are discharged from the hospital, they don't have a place to go. They don't have normal shelter. This will provide that shelter and a chance for them to rehabilitate in a safe environment with trained professionals around them. So the Manette, now I'm going to get into some deeply affordable housing projects that we partnered on. Excuse me. So with Kitsap Community Resources, Manette Townhome Project, I won't read all of that in there, but it's 9 townhomes. And so that's an example of construction, contributing to a construction project with several partners. Mills Crossing, now that's a different example of creating deeply affordable housing. So that one is purchasing something that was built at market rate and assembling partners and financing to make that purchase, and then set it aside for permanent, affordable and supported housing. So 2 different models. One, you assemble the financing, you build from the ground up. The second one, market makes the build, and then you come in afterwards and make the purchase. So both have places. One may have a bigger future in our community. Housing Navigation Program. We just developed that program this year. One of the things we've noticed, and I get these calls every week from folks who are desperate for housing. It's not so much they can't afford the housing that might be available. It's they don't have a place to go to even, there's no housing that they can find. So this program is kind of unique, and it's going to help us identify housing for the housing vouchers that the Bremerton Housing Authority has. We'll expand that to also include just basic support and, of course, connecting folks with other resources. Again, this is the definition in the city of Bremerton of affordable housing. And we have housing stock. It's just a matter of locating it and then matching it up with the right person. So with Mills Crossing, the Housing Navigation Program, I'm proud to say we have partnered with Kitsap County. So we were, County Commissioner Walters is in the room, but those are two programs. We have partnered to a level I've never seen before in this is my 14th year in office. So I'm proud of the relationships we're building. The next one, Affordable Housing Development Project. So we have the navigation program. This one here is Shadow Creek. And so we just signed off on this partnership here. I'm just now comfortable enough to put it up on the screen and say we are underway with this one. So that's just some examples of deeply affordable housing. So let's get to the next slide. Now this is the workforce housing. And this has been a full court press of one ordinance, one code change after another to my city council. And I think I overwhelmed them at times, but you'll see as we go through this has all been done in my first 5 years as mayor. Duplexes, townhomes, cottage housing throughout our low density residential. Density bonuses, increasing our density. So every level has now had an increase in it. You know, going down here, even our minimum density areas, you know, we now require 6 and above. You know, we've got some things we did in our general commercial to allow for housing to be developed where it was restricted before. And we've made accommodations for manufactured homes. So, and modular is something that is not new to us. We embrace those techniques. We have experience with it. I may get a question on that. Next slide, please. So, administrative, you know, we've been able to take some, we created a code actually. And so you can see here, we expedited permit process for subdivisions. Lot size averaging is interesting. That's one of the, you know, when we were talking earlier about the challenges of some areas and lots maybe not being fully utilized because of, for whatever reason, it might be next to a critical area, it might be on a slope. We will figure out a way to get you to the minimum density in that area with the lot size, with the lot part that is available for development. So that's a code in place. I talked a little bit earlier, but we amended our district core development standards. We languished for years with empty vacant commercial space on the first floors of many multi-housing development projects. So we moved from that. Market will determine when those commercial spaces will be valuable again. And it just we made that move. And let's get to the next slide. ADUs. This one I'm most proud of. You cannot see the bruises and what it took to get this through. We went from full restriction, all the way from design code to needing an owner on site for a property, all the way to today, which we now allow up to 2 ADUs per property with no owner occupancy requirements, and we've relaxed many of the design elements for this. You'll see something that's pleasing, but there won't be specific hard and fast code requirements. So we've created that. All of this is designed to keep, you know, when I was bringing this to the council and we talked with our community, everybody thought it was too much change. And I said, no, actually, this is an effort to try to keep things the way we recognize them. This is the retired school teacher. This is the college student. This is the workforce housing that were the mixed neighborhoods. this will allow us to continue that versus what is happening today, where we are slowly losing it as a community. So I believe if we keep on this, we keep pushing, we can create these neighborhoods that we have that nice mix that we've all come to appreciate over time. And that will be it. And so I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you. So I think to start, what we're gonna do is first, maybe you've heard, I think, 3 very interesting presentations, and they're kind of hearing from each other too. So, that they might want to discuss a couple of these, to start with, and then we're gonna open it up to everybody else. But, so I asked them, I said, okay, well, how do you define affordable? And you did hear what the mayor said. I think that was a good definition. I mean, he started with workforce housing. So basically, my question is with that, and the fact, as I said at the beginning, that the affordable price that people should be paying is about half of what houses are going for right now. So how do we reduce that gap? And you heard some things here. I will mention that the legislature is taking this on full scale, and they're addressing some of the things that Mayor Wheeler talked about. I was talking to our league, well, she's a volunteer lobbyist, but excellent, she has excellent knowledge, and she sent me a list of all the legislation, which went on for 3 pages, of all the different types of legislation that this legislature is now in the midst of considering, some of which, again, I think Mayor Wheeler talked about, to make it easier to build different types of housing, to reduce the permit times, and you heard some of this. So I'd just like to ask the 3 of you, and each whoever wants to go first, but to talk about, is it a doable thing to build enough affordable housing without that being all subsidized? So,
Grab the microphone at the base of the podium.
oh yeah, thank you. Who would like to go first on that? Okay, of course.
Well, that's a good question. You know, one of the things, first of all, we talk about speed and the progressive zoning and some of the most beautiful environment in the world. And when I served in the Navy, I did see a lot. We have something that's special here. I don't see demand going down. And with progressive zoning, we actually have a lot of demand. So our staff is working overtime to keep up with this demand. So many of the housing strategies I brought forward are not state legislated. They are allowed currently in our current building codes, and within state law. So we are just pushing the envelope. It's not something that needs to be legislated, although if enough jurisdictions don't do what they can within their capabilities with what they have to work with, then it could become pushed by the state. So what was the second part of the question, Martha?
Do you think we can build enough to?
Yeah, that's the $64 million question. It depends on, it's all supply and demand. And I think we should just continue to do what we can and not worry about a future where we may not be able to. I think we do need to utilize every technique, every effort, every zoning code opportunity, every process improvement idea that comes forward and do the best we can.
So my quick answer is yes. But there are definitely steps we need to take. So some of the things on the construction side, what builders can do are some of the things that we talked about. changing how they're building is a big one. Unfortunately, stick frame housing tends to cost more. Do I say we should all do prefabrication? No, there's still plenty of room and there's opportunities to use, conventional stick frame housing. However, if you're trying to build something that is in these categories of deeply affordable workforce, or what Bill Green kind of terms attainable, which is the 80 to 120% of AMI, and still have it be green and not, making our climate worse in the long run, and marching our way towards those climate goals that we have to meet in the state. We do need to change with how we build. And some of those can be done on a conventional stick frame house. We can build, simpler looking structures that are smaller, which take less resources. If they're smaller, maybe we have more on one lot, which means that then you can have one lot cost that the builder has to purchase, but they can sell, let's say, 6 to 8 units instead of 1. Now, a lot of communities face the challenge that builders are buying these lots, tearing down smaller, older homes and putting on what a lot of people call McMansions. And they don't like that either. They want their single family zone, but they don't want all these giant houses that go easement to easement to easement. Well, one of the solutions is to allow them to build more units on that same lot. Because then you're gonna fit smaller houses, but from a development standpoint, that builder can now sell multiple units off of that one land purchase. So it makes the housing more affordable. It makes the community still have a smaller, aesthetic. Like the picture I had of the cottages earlier, that's actually a project here in Winslow. And that is a green certified cottage community. It's very adorable, but it's a lot denser than, a 20,000 square foot lot with a 5,000 square foot house. So, you can have that kind of similar look in a denser environment. Now, will that solve all our problems? No, we still need to have a wide range and have multifamily spaces where we do have low rise, medium, and in some cities, high rise. Because we need to have a variety of options to fit different housing needs, but also different spatial needs. So the reason we have the Growth Management Act is to reduce sprawl, right? Sprawl is bad too, because we have a beautiful environment, we want to protect it. But what that means is that certain areas will need to be denser than others. And that also, in other parts of our state, eats up farmland. And farming and rural land is also very integral to our state's culture. And so not only are we trying to protect this forest, but we're trying to protect farmland. So that's one reason to go denser, but there's a variety of ways you can do that. ADUs are a great option. And I'm super proud to hear about Bremerton because they're more progressive than some of the King County cities I work with. So it's great that you guys have this example in your community that are pushing those boundaries and doing it in a way that I fully am like, can I just send you out to all my communities and have them tell them all your stories? But then, yeah, design. Everybody loves to ask me, well, how much does it cost to build a greenhouse? And I'm like, that depends. There are too many variables for my human brain to put into any sort of calculator to say, this is how much it's gonna cost. How big is it? What materials do you select? Green doesn't have to mean more cost. It's all about how you're doing it, what products you're using. That you could build a super deep green home and have it cost just as much as the code built home next door that, is maybe 20% less efficient, and has vinyl and, other kind of less ideal materials. But it's all in how the builder obtains that education and designs it. And so, Brian, I'll let you finish the prefabrication talk.
I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it's going to be very challenging. I mean, one of the things that I don't think is reconciled is when we look at it sort of it from the perspective of AMI, that isn't really reconciled with the reality of construction costs and what it costs to build projects like
AMI is.
Yeah. And, you know, depending upon how that AMI is being measured, you know, for instance, in say down in Portland, Multnomah County is a very economically diverse county. The AMI tends to be pretty high, and that affects how all the metrics that Mary Wheeler was talking about, and it creates challenges. Property value isn't getting cheaper. That puts the requirement for greater density on those sites. And if we're talking, I mean, obviously, the solutions are going to look different in different communities. So if we're talking about urban centers where it's an even greater gap, you are talking about large scale multifamily. You know, from my perspective of affordable housing that is being developed by affordable housing developers, that is, you know, HUD funded. You know, you also are looking at prevailing wage being required on construction, which adds 20-25% to the construction cost. So that it's more expensive to build the affordable housing than it is to build market rate, which creates almost untenable challenges. If the zoning requirements have, you know, a sort of design review, lengthy land use approvals, that creates risk for the developer, it creates long timelines. I know we just can't build enough units quicker is a challenge, and it's getting more and more expensive to build those units. It's something that everybody's trying to figure out what it is. In Oregon, I've been working with a group that's talking to the state about doing a state-funded, yet probably not operated modular factory, with the idea that if we can try to streamline, this would be for strictly affordable housing. If you streamline it, have it at its own sort of approval path, you could maybe start to put it in. California has been doing this. So there are going to have to be very aggressive ways we think about the production of housing and almost separate it from other aspects of our permitting process, I think. And then, you know, just certain construction typologies aren't silver bullets. Modular is not a silver bullet. It does have its applications, but at the end of the day, stick built is the cheapest way to do it. I mean, it is. There's no cheaper method of construction. Yeah, I mean, I like to know what it is. Now, having said that, yeah, you know, we had a client in Los Angeles where we were doing modular houses, spec houses, with the idea of being affordable. That affordability was very relative, but the cost of stick built there was such that it didn't make sense for us to look at modular construction with our mod manufacturer was in Salem, Oregon. And even with transportation and setting from, you know, coming all the way from Oregon, it still made it pencil more. But you have to look at things like that. Modular has its own complications from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Yeah, I don't know. I would like it, you know, we can find ways to build more housing quicker, but the gap keeps getting bigger the longer we try to solve the problem.
Wow. So can I follow? So is modular construction more expensive right now because we just don't have as many factories and like modular production hasn't ramped up? And then the zoning on top of that, like the reviews
Yeah, I mean, hard costs of modular coming out of the factory. You know, your mod, if you took the same amount of that site built stick frame, the modular is gonna be more expensive. But the key there is you can build quicker, and that's the key. And so if you can build quicker, but to build quicker, that means you have everything dialed in. It's a different workflow for modular.
Question involved.
Well, okay, yeah, so that's the other aspect of this. Is that while, if you look at any sort of modular manufacturer that's been around for, you know, modular's been around for decades. And so there's some very well-established manufacturers. If you look at what they do day to day, it's very specific products. It's, they'll do chain hotels, they will do housing, not all do multi-story, not all mod manufacturers are comfortable with multi-story, and commercial.
Student housing.
Student housing, but it's very specific modular manufacturers, yeah. And, but you know, they'll do a lot of work with schools, do a lot of work, but it's because they can actually create a actual manufacturing process, because they aren't contractors, they are manufacturers. And so bringing one-off or low volume proposals to them isn't manufacturing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You need volume then.
You know, I think what I'm gonna do now is, because I appreciate, getting that, all your input. But I think I am gonna turn it over to the audience, because I can see there's some interest in getting some input from the audience. So, now, I think we're gonna figure out how this works. I think we're gonna try with just talking loudly, and we'll see. This is our little now, and we're gonna see how well that works. If it doesn't seem to work, and I'll get some feedback from the folks over here. If it's not working, if either you guys can't hear or the Zoom audience can't hear, then we'll take the mic around. So would you like to start?
Yeah, Brian, that was great about modular. You obviously know a lot about it, but there's one other aspect that people often forget, and that's when you build a six-sided volumetric box.
Right.
You're doubling the cost of the materials, because you're building a wall and a wall, and then a box with another wall and a wall, and you're building a floor and a ceiling. You're doubling the cost of all the materials. So while you get some manufacturing efficiencies, you lose it on the materials.
Yeah, you are adding complexity to what otherwise would be a pretty straightforward construction. And it's not just in the frame and the structure. Obviously, each mod has to be structured in a way that can be transported.
Yeah.
And
It's different.
yes, it has to be stiff. You're also, just in terms of your electrical rough-in and mechanical and plumbing rough-in. Electrical rough-in, you're doing things you just wouldn't do on site, because you have, the minute you have all those systems crossing over between lines, you have to create the ability for them to do that, and do that when it's on site. Inspections are challenging. Some jurisdictions don't even want to mess with it. You know, for instance, I think Portland was going to try to take on all the inspection duties themselves as opposed to the state, which I don't know how they're going to do, because, you know, maybe that works if there's a very well-established manufacturer in Onsville next to Salem, but there's manufacturing in Idaho that people use. There's manufacturers in China that people use. You know, in South Lake Union, the Citizen Inn Hotel, they're a chain hotel, they're modular. Those get manufactured in China. They have to hire a third-party inspector to go over to China for the inspection of everything that's done in the factory. So I mean, these are obviously things that have worked, and they you know, our Jarrett project was a great way to approach it. One, because our developer is very small. It allowed them to actually not having, they self-perform, they're also their GC, so all of a sudden they could hand 80% of the construction off to the mod manufacturer, and that was good for them because they could do other things. So the site, has sort of lent itself to that. But if you could have stick built that, on site and not and had maybe major areas of stage and whatnot, you probably could have built it cheaper. I think, I don't know, might have been a tie.
Yeah, and I think my biggest experience is we don't have a lot of builders in our program using modular because it is kind of a smaller niche. We don't have as many manufacturing plants here. Although Forterra, who I did have a picture of, is kind of developing that they're doing a CLT version of modular. However, ones that we do have proven, and I have numbers to back that up, is SIPS construction. So structurally insulated panels. They are still prefabricated in a factory, so you're getting all the benefits of, being built in a factory, so you don't have to worry about weather. It takes less people. It's still sort of a factory production, but it does allow you to basically send your plans to the manufacturer and say, this is the walls, and here's the cutouts, and here's the rough ends. And they come and basically you have a wall panel, and it even does roofs. It's all pretty much finished except for your exterior sheathing. Not sheathing, your cladding. And so it cranes in, but it's a much smaller system, so it cranes in much easier. It comes flat packed, so think IKEA on a flatbed truck. So they get trucked in and then they're just stood up. Sort of like barn raising back in the day.
And do sit mods.
Yeah, you can do mod a lot of things. CLT can be modular, SIPs and MCFs can be modular. All of these are just different ways of building homes and factories. The one benefit is that you're kind of offsetting, you're getting it built faster, you're using less labor. And then when you get it to site, it just goes up faster. What's also nice about those fabricated panels is that they have a much higher insulative value, which means they're airtight, they're energy efficient out the wazoo because of how they're made and sealed. So you can get a more cost-effective, high-performance house using these prefabricated methods. Now, you can also build stick frame very inexpensively, depending on other material choices. Or just building smaller in general. So, I totally agree. There's never gonna be a silver bullet anymore. We're not gonna find a silver bullet to solve all our options. It will be what is the best option for that site, that budget, goals of that project, in terms of what the homeowner needs or the community needs. And these are all things that have to be talked about at that sort of conceptual design phase. The sooner you get these conversations going in terms of high performance, what type of construction we're doing, the cheaper it's going to be, because you're not going to be making these decisions when you have to change all the drawings. Yeah.
So another question, before I take that, I just want to know, are you getting questions over there in the chat?
Yeah, I'll let you.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that, going forward, the factory seems to be a good option. If you can eliminate the human construction part, that just bring in computers and robots. That's the way of the future.
Again, a modular manufacturing floor, it's not behaving like a site construction. It is to a very degree assembly line. It's a little bit like commercial construction, family, can be sometimes challenging for the floor because they have to pay attention to what's a rated wall. There's, what rated assemblies there are. And, I think certain manufacturers are probably more versed into it. But the other thing is that modular does want things to be standardized to a certain degree. So that how the single family projects, I was talking about LA, our office was part of a group of about 6 architects that this developer put together to do sort of bespoke modern houses, all hillside lots, which was also a little odd for me, modular, because lots of everything would be on a hill. But we did it anyway. And but one of the things to get all the architects, I had to get them to understand is that, we're all going to be doing unique homes to a point. We need, Blazer in Owensville does need all these houses to be doing, like a header detail needs to be the same across all of the details that are really making up the typical conditions. And you need them to be the same. Otherwise, they'll just say, I'm not doing this because their floor, the people that work on the floor don't want to say, oh, this mod's going to be this unique one. It's the same house. And now that mod's this thing. And now this mod's this thing. Does not go well.
It strikes me sort of like, the Ford, when he started making the Model T, you can have any color as long as it's black. I mean, it's just sounding like some of this is a question of volume and standardization is the audience was talking about, and also maybe helps deal with the other question, which you brought up, Sonja, about just getting the right people, the right skills that we don't have enough people, but great for us if we can start providing that training and getting them on. So, yes.
So I'm curious how you approach a balance with affordability, but also ADA accessibility, and that ties into aging in place where we've got an aging population. So, but you get a multi-story that needs an elevator and the cost goes way up. So how do you fight that battle?
Yeah, I mean, not to get too in the weeds of that, but let's say like on Jarrett. So Jarrett being a 3-story walk-up, in which a single stair only serves 4 units. We didn't have to have an elevator, also those, and because we didn't have an elevator, levels 2 and 3 didn't have to be accessible. The ground floor had to be accessible, which on a very tight site like that, presented challenges in terms of using modular, because it meant, that finished floor had to be, in this case, directly at the same elevation as grade. So that meant wood frame construction was now below grade effectively. And so we created kind of a very wide drainage channel around the whole thing that we could modify the adjacent grade. But again, it's, we wanted to use modular, it definitely wanted to be type 5B construction. And so it just becomes a design challenge, but that is correct. I mean, you definitely, as we try to meet the housing gap, within that is all this specificity about the different demographics that are using and their needs the different housing needs that you're serving. That was one of the things that was important to us on Laura's Place, was that at least 2 of these, what we have control over in terms of their accessibility is the 2 new units. And that was important in that case, because, even if it wasn't serving someone with some sort of accessibility issue, all the moms have, potentially strollers, or, as usually their children are still at that age. So, it's an important question, especially when you start thinking about to have the cost of construction down, keeping that down.
I feel like you would have some input. Because you're building a lot of housing, right?
Right, but yeah, our permits are numbered in the well over 1,000 each year. For the city of Bremerton, I know you don't have anything to match that up against, but it's a lot for the city of Bremerton. And the question was about, future proofing your property, about ADA accessibility. And, with the zoning, especially with the ADU, accessory dwelling unit, we actually, another ordinance we passed was to make basements, give them the potential to be a habitat. So their ADU could be in a basement. And so, I can just give you an example of, a couple future-proofing their basement. It has access right straight to the sidewalks in the street. So it's going to eliminate stairs for the future. That ADU will have the wide entries, the, accessibility to bathrooms and the kitchen, and the different rooms in there. And, just other features, counter heights and all of that. So when we pass this ordinance, all of a sudden now you've got a household that can possibly move downstairs into an ADU. Caregivers can move upstairs. There's all kinds of benefits to creating potentially a multi-generation household, or just, there's the opportunities are numerous. We, I see that, I push for it in the city, that's what we're doing. And you'll probably see more of that in the future, that type of living arrangement, which adds density. It's a way of, getting over the affordability crisis, maybe for a household. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question or part of it.
Yeah, and to latch on the ADUs are becoming very popular. They're very, very hot right now. You get both to build them and sell them. And one of the reasons we're seeing people add ADUs is maybe not even for family members, but to actually create stable income for themselves. Because they can leverage their property and create that unit that they can then rent to somebody else. That then helps the community add one more housing unit to somebody who could rent that unit. You can also, in certain cities, we actually have seen it where builders will build a single family residence with 2 ADUs, which happens a lot in Seattle because they have a similar proposition where you can build up to 2 ADUs on a single family lot. And what the builder will do if it's new construction is actually condoize units, meaning they can sell each of those units separately. So there is opportunities where you can, as a property owner, either live there and have stable income through an addition of an ADU, or you can build one and sell it potentially, or rent it out, or for a family member. So there's so many ways to use an ADU. And there are some government, certain states like California do have some programs to help you pay for them. There's also organizations that, like I think it's called the Block Project, which actually will build the ADU on your site free of cost. And they actually rent that housing out to somebody who is struggling with housing. They're typically marginalized populations, whether they are system impacted or needing rehabilitation, but they provide a stable housing for them at no cost to you, and provide a great community service. And they have community coordinators that work with those individuals, and they do a match program. So it's not like a random stranger who comes to live on your property. They actually will kind of match up homeowners and folks. So it's a great community project that is a nonprofit in Seattle that I know is working on that. So those are other examples of alternative ADUs.
So, yes, in the back.
I have a question, I guess it would be for Mayor Wheeler. I don't know how big of an issue it is in Kitsap County specifically, but I know a lot of counties that have a large tourism industry lost a whole lot of units to the Airbnb or short-term rental market. So I'm just wondering if there is if that's been a major problem in our county, and if there's any I don't know, direction towards either discouraging that or encouraging the opposite to do more long-term rentals to keep those single room and ADU units available to our workforce rather than to tourism.
Right. Yeah, no, there's been a loss on that, and we're monitoring that. So we, we are a destination, and so we have it's kind of interesting because it's, you know, you're coming here, I'm seeing a lot of those, being workforce housing. We have government, a huge government town, Bremerton, government contractors coming in. They need something for 3 months or 4 months. They have options. And so, but as far as just the tourist industry, we're just monitoring it for right now. You know, if balance becomes, something that is going to throw things off, we'll have to act on that. But, yeah.
Okay, so we have in the back. Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering, Sonja, if you could say, what said they're getting more popular. And were you talking about in Kitsap County particularly or Washington? And do you have numbers that you could? Oh,
I don't have numbers off the top of my head. I just know that any realtor I talk to is like, sign me up. So for example, to speak to the demand, Earth Advantage, which is the Oregon state counterpart to us, offers a monthly all about ADU workshop to basically say how to build an ADU, how to, kind of go through the process. It's so popular that they have it every month. Anytime that we offer any sort of education about ADUs, the room is full. So I think it's a very popular option, and we're seeing ADUs sell like hotcakes. Now, most of my knowledge is King County. It's a stupid, crazy market to begin with. And so anything kind of sells quickly, but ADUs have their place, and they are very popular because they are small footprint and they tend to be more affordable because of that small footprint. Typically an ADU is anywhere from 600 to 1,200 square feet in space. Now they could be single story, for a small, just kind of ADU, or kind of studio style, or maybe 1 bedroom. They could also be 2-story, and you could fit in like an 1,100 square foot, you could get 2 bedrooms with a bathroom. And so we see those kind of floor plans. What's also great is that some cities have pre-approved ADU designs that if you choose, one of the 4 options, you kind of streamline that process. They're great for homeowners because they have, some different design styles, but they're already pre-approved plan sets. So that speed to start is much faster. And it helps you with design costs because those designs are kind of there. Now you'll probably need to change some things and still work with a designer for all the specifications, but it does save a lot of time and money.
So Wheeler, could you also comment on that in terms of Bremerton, is the ADU so popular and happening,
We, since this is so new, I can't present any statistics. One of the things, we developed this program, and I think Martha will end up sharing it at some point to most of you in the room if you left your email address. The next part is, and maybe the state would be able to support us if we're going to talk about affordable housing, ways to monitor and measure success, know what we're success, and then that way we can determine where our adjustments need to be made. I will, figure out a way to build in a measurement and monitoring system. So, and then we'll do that, but it'd be a lot easier if we had support and across jurisdictions on how to do that.
I was going to add that there was an article in the Seattle Times just recently, I think maybe a week ago, on that very question, and they included maps to show there was I think they said over 1,000 of them, and where they were being built too. So that's take a look at that. That's just for the Seattle area. It's not Kitsap. So yeah.
Yeah, and one of the services Built Green offers is that when we pair it with an incentive structure, we know how many projects we've certified and where they are. So what we do is if cities want to know how many projects have been utilizing that that incentive, we can provide those numbers to the city. We can say, this is how many Built Green certified projects are in your, that we've certified in a given time frame and what type of housing they are. Because we track what type of housing. We also track the performance, like what star level are they getting certified at, and so, for example, on a given year, we're certifying, give or take, about 1,000 units a year. Last year we certified our largest in about a decade, which was like over 1,300. So primarily in Seattle, because again, Seattle has these very valuable incentive structures that builders look at and go, why would I not do this? And that's the part where we need to find in many other jurisdictions is carrying that sort of what is the builder value enough to do that extra little bit to get them. And we're happy to share those numbers. And I agree, having something where you can say, okay, did this get the results we are looking for? That's really, we always need to have that built in, whether it's our program, a city incentive program, or policy, tracking that data is king, right, to see if something's successful.
So I see, one of our Sherry Appleton, one of our retired, representatives. So we do a question here.
And I am going to stand up because it's easier for people to hear you.
Thank you.
We're talking about affordability. But affordability is saying that somebody who has a child or somebody who might have 2 children, that's what affordability is being marketed to. But what if you're a family who has 5 children? What happens to them? They're not part of that whole scenario because there are not enough bedrooms for children to be in. And I find that something is missing from all of this because you're only targeting a very small population as opposed to what normal families do have. Some have 3, some have 4, and that disturbs me because I want affordability for everybody. I don't want there to be a discrimination against a family who might have 3 children as opposed to a single mom who only has 1 child. So how do you think you can fix that?
Well, great, Sherry, very good to see you, by the way, great question. With this really laser focus to develop more housing and more types of housing, we start to expand options. And so what I foresee in theory, a single individual renting a 3-bedroom home who has no other options would move to the appropriate size unit, which could be 2-bedroom, probably 1-bedroom or studio. And so that frees up the 3-bedroom for that housing, the housing situation you're talking about. Same, there is so many scenarios in the city of Bremerton where they mass produced a certain type of home. This probably that way in every built environment in our, in our country. That with this new model we're bringing in to create workforce housing, that all of a sudden kind of starts to redirect some folks into a different situation. I totally agree with you that we need to be thinking of when we design, we need to be thinking about those families. And so this is the approach we've adopted and the theory.
Can I add to that?
Okay.
My name's Commitment Israel. I'm CEO for a new high-tech construction startup. We're looking to do 3D printing of mass housing for affordable housing, but particularly for single-family residences. And that's, we can do up to 1,800 square feet. So it accounts for like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath we can do. But that is really an area that we want to address as well, is that size of being able to do family size houses and not apartment units for affordable housing. So no, we're doing 3D printing on site. So our printer is modular and ships to the site, and then we print one solid piece of concrete.
Yeah, we didn't do your 3D printing justice earlier, but I actually just, yeah, there's a new one I just saw that uses clay. So there is a lot of innovation in 3D printing, and 3D printing can be a great tool in certain circumstances. Again, we need a variety of construction types. We need a variety of housing sizes. I think one of the ways that we can get those family-sized houses to be more affordable, more obtainable to those families is look at how we're designing the footprint. So if you need 4 or 5 bedrooms, how are you utilizing the rest of the household in terms of your spatial planning? Are you suddenly bumping this house up to a 5,000 square foot house because you need a 1,000 square foot dining room with a kitchen or bathrooms? Or can we create something that's a bit more spatial efficient? So multifunctional spaces that can serve multiple purposes depending on what time of day. Can we live, on a smaller footprint with the same amount of people and still provide single family housing and still have a community basis? But the reality is that current construction costs and land costs just make it so that we can't build really big houses and live sort of that older American dream of everyone has their own bedroom, bathroom, and a large footprint with a large backyard. I think that, when we talk, that is the unfortunate situation. Also, from a land use perspective, we just can't afford it. We can't afford to house that low of a density, given how much land we have, unless we want to strip the land and overdevelop. And that's why we limit sprawl. So, yeah.
Okay, so
I think but it comes down to, we just need to build cities with a variety of housing costs, or not costs, but types. So we need to serve every single type of family in whatever stage they're at. But that really, the zoning and land use planning that is happening right now is going to dictate how we can achieve that and if we can achieve that.
So,
Yes. Touch on that 3-bedroom.
yes,
Guys, add one thing. That question of larger units, is something that is a constant discussion, especially in large scale multifamily development. Especially where the developer is getting density bonuses to add affordable housing to their project. The challenge that developer faces is how much subsidy or benefits are they getting, because at the end of the day, a large 3-bedroom unit is probably the one that rents the least, and it's displacing maybe 3 studios, or and I'm not justifying it, but they have realities relative to their pro forma that makes it very challenging for them to provide that broad mix. And I know the developers that I work with, it's something that they're constantly trying to figure out, because they know that they're being asked to provide that. I think it's a little bit more achievable on the for sale side, even in the multifamily like condo, because then you can actually, there's usually buyers that have been pre-approved because of income that are gonna be able to acquire those units. But on the rental side, it's a challenging equation to try to figure out.
I want to make sure this time for, so is it Beth, right? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question that's kind of a departure from what I've been hearing. I haven't heard anybody talking about human sewage and the issue connected to affordability. I mean, you add $20,000 to $40,000 of expense for every residence just to connect either to a sewer or to provide septic, which we don't live in a city here in Kingston. We live in an unincorporated part of Kitsap County. We don't have sewer in most of greater Kingston. So I'm curious, who is working on innovation in the space of affordability related to the future of how we use potable water, how we manage human waste? There's got to be opportunities there, but the state of Washington, the Department of Health, has so little to offer in terms of options for whether you want a composting toilet. Like, there's just a really short list of approved devices. And they offer, I don't think even gray water's not legal. It's, okay, I'd love to, I just want to know who's working on this space so that I can like help them move the needle, a bit.
Yeah, so good news on the front. First off, you can use your rainwater. You can collect your rainwater, you can use your gray water from your sinks, your lavatories, and your clothes washer. The tricky part is, and thankfully, we did have something, I think it was voted in either last year or the year before, that basically was signed into law saying that the Department of Health is required to create pathways, standardized pathways for how we can reuse water on site. That is still coming. Currently, there is a great resource by the International Living Futures Institute that I highly recommend if anyone is interested in water reuse, to please look at their case study. It looks at cost-effective water reuse in the city of Seattle, and they actually looked at it from a policy and approval perspective. So, and it looks at it from different scales, single family, small multifamily to large scale multifamily, and the cost-effective strategies. And actually, the most cost-effective thing you can do on a single family house is actually to collect rainwater to flush your toilets, because you don't have to clean it as much, and you don't have to store as much to flush your toilet. Then what you would do is, you want to take it a step further, or one way or the other, you could use your shower and sink and potentially your clothes washer gray water to irrigate your landscaping, because you don't have to store it. And when you need it in the summer, guess what it doesn't do in the summer? It doesn't rain. So you quickly draw down a storage tank that you collect rainwater with. Whereas if you're using gray water, you have that as a supply all year round. Now, typically they're installed with a little valve that you can shut off in the winter when you don't want to put more water in your ground, because we're raining at that point. But it's a great way to reuse water in a really cost-effective application. And that whole report talks, like I said, on different scales and gives numbers.
I should probably answer probably the
Yeah.
most unpopular part.
Yeah.
I'll answer the most unpopular part, which is the cost per hookup. So I think you mentioned that is something that might add to the cost of housing. So at least what I can do is provide an explanation. The cost is partially just for engineering analysis, inspection fees and that. The other part is for each hookup, your future paying into the system that's going to need to handle the new capacity.
Some assets.
Yeah.
Has anybody thought about membrane technology, the Huitt-Zollars? They use it on their reservation. There were people on Hood Canal who started using membrane technology. And it only is a little box, but it cleans the water.
Absolutely.
And able to go back into the ground and pure, and you can drink from it. And it's not as expensive as hooking up to sewer, which can cost you $1,000.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a proponent of membrane technology. I've toured plants, future development. We should consider it. Absolutely.
So, Carol, you have to repeat the name of the organization that you talked
Oh, yeah, so you're gonna look at the International Living Future Institute. And it's a long title, so I'm not gonna get it all right, but if you Google that name with cost-effective water reuse in Seattle, you should be able to find the page where you can download the report.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, gentlemen.
So, this is supposed to be a symposium on affordability. The mayor talked about paying $500,000 average home, and our target is 250. So we've heard a lot of ideas, but is that just a bridge too far without a subsidy? And when the subsidy comes all kinds of other competing things. For example, you have the GMA, you have the critical areas. Both of those reduce the buildable land significantly, especially in an area that's surrounded by the water. Then if you get some kind of a subsidy or grant, I was a project manager on this building. And to get a grant required prevailing wage, which Brian mentioned, it required LEED silver, which is not cheap. And it's, we didn't go any higher because it just got too expensive. So I'd like each of you to just say, are we gonna meet that target without the subsidy?
You want to start running?
Well,
That's kind of how we started.
I would say the valley right now is no affordable housing that occurs is without any subsidy. That's just a reality, and even then, depending upon where the context of that housing, even that's not enough. I wanted to just say one thing about the ADU, because it relates to your question, because I'm on the fence about when we talk about how we're going to solve this. I mean, completely agree. We have to figure out a diverse sort of family of housing typologies. I'm not convinced that ADU is part of that equation, because we're working with a dad up in Seattle, and we were fighting for that thing to be less than $500,000. We've got to 250, and it's about, it has a less than a 400 square foot footprint. It's 2 stories. And we had to strip down the architecture almost to its barest. Yeah, it's a box with a cable, and it's still gonna be very nice, and it's gonna work for that client because they live next to UW and they're gonna charge, $2,500 for it. Who knows what it is? Student housing around there, affordability for student housing around, say UW is a challenge for UW. So, the challenge with, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna kind of go over a couple different topics here, but when something comes smaller in architecture, it becomes more expensive. Because there's just not enough of it. And so that is something we have to, that's something we have to figure out. And I think that's probably where prefabrication becomes much more useful. And as construction costs go higher, for instance, for affordable housing, prevailing wage it makes no sense. And I know why we do it, and the intention is right. But when affordable housing costs more than market rate, there's a problem. And not just a little more, a lot more. So there's going to have this subsidies is just going to be a reality. It has to be a reality. And it was interesting. Remember, they were talking about how to get around the critical areas and whatnot, things that put added constraint on sites. I think thinking about that creatively is, especially in areas such as this, where obviously it's a kind of a given that there's going to be potentially sites that have either critical areas or just problematic soils or what have you. Who knows what the issue is? That's right.
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, just from my perspective, maybe city of Bremerton perspective, if I was to, if we can get away from generalities, and we're talking about median incomes, median house sales, and get into the specific, talking with somebody, if they were to ask me, can I purchase a home? I mean, obviously the first thing you look at is, well, how much home do you need? Where do you need to live? What kind of income do you have? What's your potential income? And, those things all have to be, answered. And so it could be that what we've come to expect as far as our starter home looks different in the future. It might be a townhome, it might be something where you share a wall with somebody. We have healthcare shortages, we have building trade shortages. These are real jobs that pay family wages. We cannot get folks to fill those jobs. And so if, as far as individuals who want to buy something here, for some, many things will be out of reach. For others, it just depends on the situation. The location, there's things that are kind of neat that are happening that are actually cost savers for households. The construction, new construction is tighter. Your energy costs are way less. Telecommuting is reducing the need for possibly a second vehicle in a household in commuting costs and parking costs. The design that the way we design our communities for the future, we have mass transits in mind. We won't be successful with our design if we do not have public transit that's frequent and reliable and affordable. And that right there is part of it. You have to have a business component that's close to our cluster development. That's the idea behind growth management is you reduce those commuting costs, you create these opportunities for entertainment, education, employment. And so these all have to come into play. And that's why I do not believe, hope we don't come away thinking our future is gloomy because of the dynamics right now. There's many things at play that could make it very, very good. And so it's just us focusing our effort. And the one thing that we have in front of us that makes us so incredibly desirable and why our permit departments are being overrun across every jurisdiction is we have a beautiful environment. I mean, I'll just share one anecdote with you. In the middle of the city of Bremerton, we are restoring Ostrich Creek. So that has been a long dead, dormant salmon spawning creek. When we're done in 5 years, we'll have salmon spawning in the middle of the 100-year-old city in a built environment. We're doing this so that leads into, orca preservation. That leads into a salmon fishing industry. It leads into an environment we are all embraced and are proud of. Clean air, clean water. So we're going to stay popular. I mean, we're going to keep working towards those things. And those are things to be optimistic about. So there's a lot of things tying together.
Yeah, and that's why Bill Green introduced the equity and social justice credits into our system. It's a required component of every project now. And what that entails is, affordable housing unit is one way to earn credits in that section. However, it's also who are you hiring on those project sites? Are you giving opportunities? Are you job training? Are you building a workforce for the future? Are you creating culture that attracts the next generation? So there's all these components that are trying to address some of these issues, right? We're trying to build that workforce, so that more people can afford housing because those jobs are good jobs. The infrastructure component, is a very broad scale. We need sewage, we need electricity grids, because now we're going more electric. We're getting away from fossil fuels. So now we need our grid upgraded. We need the public transit because then we don't have to, use room for parking. In terms of, how many houses can we fit on a lot next to a critical area, and all of these sort of things take up space. So how can we use this space more effectively, not just for housing, but in an entire city, in an entire county?
So
Thank you, Brian, for answering my question.
So I think that it's past 3 o'clock. So I'm gonna close it up. Did you get? Okay, so it looks like the Zoom is okay. So what I'm coming out with this is that this is a multi-pronged thing that we have to do, an initiative. We have technological components. We have government components to make this easier. We have incentives that can be given that will help this, but do not require government subsidy, which I'm kind of, and the simpler, I'm one of these people, the simpler, the better. So I think those are, so I guess I'll give it 5 more minutes. I just want to see what is it we think. I talked to one group, the Affordable Housing Subcommittee for Kingston, and so they asked me, said, okay, so after this, what next? What's the next step? So I guess I'm going to turn that back over to you, to all of us. what's the next step that we should be doing? We know that the legislature has got ideas, but I think it's gonna be something that all of us have got our own ideas and in our own community to see, make this a success. So I hope you got some of those ideas from this conversation this afternoon. I really appreciate everybody coming. We do have some coffee. You're welcome to stay and have one-on-ones or more conversations. I think our panelists said they could stay a little while longer. But I want to thank you for coming today. And I think it was a good discussion. So thank you.